apologies. I've just scrolled across at the top to see everyone who's here because there's so many.
Okay, so I think with thanks to Jake, we are now live. So morning.
Just setting up, sorry.
All
It's
right.
still thinking about it.
Okay.
There we go.
Great. Okay, so good morning, members, colleagues. Thank you very much for joining us. So we've got the Constitution Working Group this morning, and I'm grateful for guests joining us, Judith Williams, Chris Harman and David Kitson. And thanks to colleagues for joining us to help us with this. Shall we start off with the agenda, members? Jake, the first item is apologies for absence. Do we have any?
Thank you, Susan. So just Councillor Hollingsby. She's hoping to join via telephone later on.
Okay, lovely. And Amandeep is on annual leave, so has passed on her apologies for the meeting today. So item 2 is declarations of interest. Are there any members? No, colleagues? No. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to item 3, the minutes of the last meeting held on the 26th of March of this year that are contained in your pack, members. Hopefully you've had the opportunity to review those. Are you minded to agree those as an accurate record?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Yeah, okay, great. I'm seeing general nods of affirmation, so thank you very much. And then we go on to item 4, which is the report of the Independent Remuneration Panel. And our thanks to Chris Harman, who has chaired the panel, for joining us today, along with Judith Williams, a member of the panel. So at this point, Chris, I'm aware that we have pre-circulated a couple of reports.
Yeah.
Can I just hand over to you to take us through and take members through this item?
Yeah. Okay. What we decided after the last meeting with the Constitution Working Group, we had another meeting of the panel, and we decided to split the report into 2 because the original report was getting very complicated because it's covering governance changes and the existing scheme. And what we thought was, if we leave it like that, it's going to get caught up in the system, and the review of the existing scheme probably would get very delayed. So you have the 2 reports. The report on the existing scheme is a formal report that obviously you have a requirement to publish, debate, make your decisions on. The report on the governance changes we've done as an interim report. So it's just for the Constitution Working Group. You don't have an obligation to publish it. You can take it into your considerations and reconvene a panel at a later date if you don't. If you want something different, if your plans change or whatever, or else you can use it to set up your scheme and then have the review after the changes are implemented. But we thought it was important to separate the 2 so that the review on the existing scheme doesn't get overly delayed. There's a couple of, just on the existing scheme, basically most things are working okay. We have written a bit more than we would usually to help the officers. So we put in there disability support scheme and adoption leave scheme. The disability one, I think, is an important area. There's a hefty underrepresentation of disabled people in political life at all, public life at all levels. Particularly, you can see it in Parliament as well, where you'd expect about 100 MPs to be disabled if you were representing the population base, but you haven't. Now, support for disability in politics comes in 2 stages. One is pre-election and the other is post-election. Some of the political parties do stuff for disabled candidates pre-election, and that's really not an issue for the panel. And we've mentioned that in the report. Post-election, we think there are things that the council can do to help disabled councillors in terms of support. So it's just an extension to the scheme in that area to basically say, yes, these expenses are legitimate. Yes, there should be support, but obviously you need some caveats around it so the cost doesn't just balloon. Adoption leave, again, straightforward stuff. You have one issue, which is with parental leave, and that is on the legislation. If someone's going to be off more than 6 months, you've got the legislation around that, so you'd have to have a separate vote in council at some stage to waive the regulations there if a person's going to be off for more than 6 months. But I think that's fairly self-explanatory, and I think those are the only real points I need to make about the existing report. Oh, we do acknowledge that certain councillors don't claim the allowances they're entitled to, like the leader, deputy leader, but we have recommended a reduction in the leader's special responsibility allowance. It's always been an outlier in the council. The reduction we're suggesting brings it back into line. I don't think I need to say more about the review on the existing scheme unless you've got particular questions. If we go to the interim report,
Can we I'm just suggesting, Chris, do you think we could take it step by step, just so that we can sort of structure the feedback from members or any comments? Is that
okay?
all
Do
right?
you want me to go through the recommendations in the main report? Then?
Yeah, I mean, that was my suggestion, members, is that, you know, we stick with the one that's entitled the fifth report of the IRP, and we go through one by one the recommendations, just to give you opportunity to, if you have any points of clarification on
Okay,
that. Is that okay? 'Cause that's the sort of here and now, isn't it? To recommend.
Yeah, this is the here and now.
Understand it. So should we do that then, Chris, with members?
Okay, if we go to page 15 or section 11, which is the summary of recommendations, that's the best place to look. So the first recommendation is a reduction in the leader of the council special responsibility allowance, and this puts the leader SRA back in the main sort of block, if you like, of where they are in Kent and in comparable authorities. It's always been an outlier, apart from Dartford, which we don't mention. So that's fairly straightforward, I think. It is a recommendation that we've made previously, and it's a recommendation that in the past the council hasn't accepted. The bit recommendation 2, that's just a tidying up, just to make absolutely clear that if you're the leader of the council, the deputy leader of the council in the cabinet model, you can give up that allowance and have the cabinet member allowance. It's sort of taken for granted in the scheme that one can do that, but the officer suggested, you know, just a bit of clarity in the wording there. So that's just administrative, really. Recommendation 3, this is about the leader of the opposition. Now, there's there's a discussion on this in the report. The panel were keen that the leader of the opposition, SRA, fulfills a democratic function, the leader of the opposition, and we wanted to avoid a group allowance. Now, our recommendations in the past on that haven't been accepted, and you operate the leader of the opposition, SRA, more like a group allowance by dividing it down among political parties that don't, you know, leaders that don't form part of the administration. We can sort of live with that, but what we do think is that when you're sharing the leader of the opposition SRA, which you are at the moment, we always had a slight uplift in it to increase it, and we're suggesting that uplift should be more. And that's because the initial idea was, you know, if you shared the leader of the opposition SRA, when you had two groups, say, the same size, which were in opposition, the duties would divide neatly of holding the administration to account. Experience shows it doesn't work like that. There's a lot of overlap, and so the work is actually more of holding the administration to account. It's only a small uplift, but we think it's quite important to make sure there is the support for those who hold the administration to account. Recommendation 4 is the dependent carer scheme. And this is a recommendation we've made before, but for some reason it sort of hasn't got incorporated. And what it's about is, if you have a carer, quite often people have informal arrangements so they can go to meetings and have a carer in to look after a dependent, and they pay them on an ad hoc basis. And what we've always said on that, well, set it at the national minimum living wage level. That's fair enough, but it's possible to be in a situation where the carer support needed is specialist support, and in which case you're not going to get away with paying the adult living wage rate. And so what we're saying again is in those sort of cases, you should be able to do it on an invoice basis and actual cost. Yeah, and particular cases maybe, say someone's got someone at home who's got dementia or something, you need a dementia nurse in there while you're away for a meeting. That's going to cost you more than national living wage. I think that's just very reasonable to do that. It gives the discretion. So if it's just an informal arrangement or whatever, and it's approved, national living wage. If it's specialist care needed, actual cost. If we go to recommendation 5, this is just extending the scheme to cover co-optees. I mean, it's the point that's made if you're on the remuneration panel, for instance, and you've got care responsibilities, the scheme doesn't cover you. And it's the same on other co-opted members you have. That's quite normal across councils. It's just something we've never put into our scheme before. So it's sort of administrative. Recommendation 6 is the parental leave. And obviously for councillors becoming a new parent or adoption, we've written a draft scheme. It's very simple. What we'd say to you is, rather than reinvent the wheel, just adopt the scheme that we're putting forward. And as I say, the only complication on that is around the legislation, where a councillor is off for more than 6 months, you need a separate resolution of council, and that's written into the scheme. Right, disability stuff. It took a lot of work around this because it's a real minefield. But basically, the DWP Access to Work scheme actually does apply to councillors. There's special provisions within it, and we've got the references. Unfortunately, if you speak to WD people, they may well not know that. It's actually in their practice manual. And councillors have had a lot of problems. So what we're saying is the council, the administrative staff and the committee services should actually help councillors access that scheme. And that's just a practical thing, because it's not easy to get support out of DWP. Unfortunately, most of the other specialist support for people taking part in public life has been cut over the last few years. So this is the only real thing available. But that's just a practical thing. If a councillor, particularly a new elected councillor becomes disabled, needs support, needs help dealing with DWP, if the administrative staff, the office staff should help with that. Recommendation 9, that's about costs associated with the disability. And we put in the caveat there that the monitoring officer should be able to have a health assessment, an occupational health assessment done if necessary, because it's a bit of a minefield. And one of the problems people have is particularly around areas of mental health where they may be undiagnosed. And that really opens a bit of a Pandora's box for a council. And so we put that caveat in that if there's any doubts in the monitoring officer's mind, they get a health assessment. But basically it's to say, yes, legitimate expenses can be reimbursed. Potentially high costs, depends. I mean, the highest cost examples I came across were situations where someone needed a support worker or a sign language person if they're doing meetings and stuff like that. That can be expensive, but I think in those situations you'd normally be able to access funds from DWP as well. So the Access to Work scheme. So I think it's one of those ones where I think the council has to do it, and I think you have to see how it goes, and you just have to have a few controls around it. But it is about dealing with some of these things. It is about how you think about the things. So for instance, with some disabilities, it may mean a person needs taxis rather than public transport, or it may mean if they're going away on a course or something, or to the LGA, they may need 2 nights in a hotel rather than 1 night because they're not able to do the journey. There's all sorts of little things you can get which can have cost implications, but the additional bits of support that make it possible for a disabled person to take a full part in democratic life, as it were. So something to think about, but we've put a caveat in there around the health assessment just to get a slight control on it. And I think it's one of those things, you see how it goes. My guess is you won't get that many claims on it, but it gives you the provision. Recommendation 10 is about the ICT allowance. The idea with the ICT allowance really was over time it should disappear, because everyone has the equipment, everyone comes the standard way of working. And this is just moving it slightly in that direction, which is saying, well, actually, rather than being an incentive to go to electronic means of working, which it was in the past, now we're at the stage where we should assume that people will do electronic means of working, and so therefore we'll move the ICT allowance to an opt-in basis rather than an opt-out. So in other words, it's assumed a councillor won't need the ICT allowance unless they want it, but no problem, they can opt into it. And that's just one step along the journey to actually eventually saying, well, this is no longer needed in the system. Okay, so it's just taking it step by step. So that's where that's coming from. It's the £266 a year. Right, recommendation 11 is about outside bodies. Now, this is very complicated, and there's a bit in the report about it, because you get, in a sense, a conflict between two sets of legislation. You've got company law on one side, which says that company director shouldn't be paid by a third party and all this sort of thing, and they must act in the interest of the company. And then you've got local government law on the other side, which says a councillor has to represent the council and represent people, and so on. And obviously people who sit on companies have this twin-hatted basis. So they may learn something in confidence as a company director related to the company, an arm's length company, and they can't speak about it in council because their source of knowledge is the company, say, and vice versa. Only applies to regulated companies, and regulated companies are defined as those the council has a controlling interest. From the panel's viewpoint, the big issue is the total remuneration a councillor gets in virtue of being a councillor. And so what we've had legal advice on this, and basically what we're proposing is not specifically allowed by the legislation, but it's not prohibited either. Whether it will stand up in court, I don't know. It's rather like the rule of only one SRA. Every councillor I'm aware of applies that rule, but that rule's not in the legislation. But councillors apply it, so it should be the same status. And what we're saying is there should be an offset. So if someone receives money for being a company director, a regulated company, and they also receive an SRA, then the SRA should be deducted pound for pound on the amount they receive from the company. And there's reasons for doing it that way round rather than the other way round. And it's because the council cannot determine what the company decides to pay. Now that's the theory. In practice, it's maybe a bit different, but in legal terms, the company passes a resolution on what they're going to pay. And so we thought the easiest way to do it, okay, let the company do that. And then, do a pound for pound deduction if a person has an SRA. If a person doesn't have an SRA, they're an ordinary councillor, fair enough, they'll get the amount. Yeah. I don't expect any problems or difficulties with that, because you do something very similar at the moment, but it's just about how you structure it, which way round. We're also putting in there the recommendation that the companies should have, the regulated companies should have their own arrangements, and tie whatever they pay to directors into an SRA or something like that. But again, that's for the companies to decide. Now, I know at the present time, they sort of link it into particular SRAs. I think is the deputy council, chair of the council, and the chair of the council SRAs. But in theory, the council can't insist on that. In theory, the companies have to decide that. But this just gives you a way of offsetting one against the other, so you don't end up with a situation where a councillor gets an SRA from the council plus a large amount of money for being a director, and so it starts to look bad, as it were. So those are the main points in the current review of the current scheme, Susan.
Right,
If there are any particular questions,
Yeah.
I've rushed through it a bit because obviously it's not in the text. But
Well, thank you very much, and it's a very clear, clearly written report. So thank you very much to you and the panel, Chris, for preparing that and also taking us through it. Should we just pause for a moment, members, and just say, are there any clarification or questions that you've got on that before we then move on to the other interim report about actually moving to committee governance system?
Hi, Susan.
Hello. We did realise
Sorry.
you're going to join us late, Jenny. So welcome.
I think I joined for a few minutes. I obviously didn't hear a lot of that. And was there a pack? Because I didn't see a paper. Has it just come out?
the reports were circulated. Both
right.
reports.
Well, I read one. Perhaps I didn't go down. I think I did. Sorry. But I was just going to say on the allowances in terms of company, it's not very different. Well, it's not really different to what we actually do now, is it?
No.
Because it basically people have the opportunity to choose which allowance they want to take, whether it's an SR, a special responsibility allowance, or a directorship.
Yeah,
I agree. Doesn't really change it doesn't actually change anything, does it?
In practical terms, it will end up exactly the same as if you said you can only take one. It's really just about how you express it, because the council cannot dictate what the company does, although in reality, you see what I mean? So we just had to find a way of expressing it, which the lawyers weren't too unhappy with. Yeah, so yes, in practical terms, it will end up exactly the same as where you are now. It just gives £1
And the other point, I suppose, because I obviously did read it, is that you decided not to go along with what we thought in terms of the 10% increase in.
That's on the next report,
in the
interim
basic
report.
No.
Yeah, and we've given the reasons for that.
Yes,
Shall I talk about that in a moment?
Yes, if you don't mind. Jenny, we're just focusing on the 5th report, which is here and now issues rather than the ones going forward.
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry.
No, it's all right, Jenny. It's always nice to have you join us. But Paul, you wanted to come in, and then Jim.
Yeah, thank you very much. The only thing I was going to ask, in relation to how we communicate that, when we put the information out on members' allowances, and we're very specific about which allowances members draw down from, how do we then make sure that people do understand that if people haven't taken a special responsibility allowance, this is the reason why? Would we have to caveat that in the way that we actually put that into the public domain? That's my question.
Yes, my inclination would be a little asterisk and a thing down the bottom and saying where allowances are received from regulated companies, there'll be a pound deduction, and let people work it out. That's what I would do, because it gets very complicated otherwise, doesn't it?
Yeah.
As you're saying, you're quite right. It's quite a difficult thing to communicate. The important thing, I think, though, is when you publish at the end of the year the amounts that people receive, and I think you do this anyway, is to add them all together, so that the public really do see how much people are receiving.
Yeah, for transparency and reporting. Yeah, absolutely.
That doesn't actually happen now, does it?
I'm not certain. I think I'm not sure what you do with the company ones on the reporting, but I think you
members, but for the council, no, I'm not sure how we do that for the other two. It's a really good point though to pick up. Paul, are you done on that? Shall I go then to Jim, and then we can go to Tim?
Yeah, I'm done with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks very much. Just really to say, an excellent report. I particularly like the recommendations with regard to councillors that are suffering with disability, and I will need some serious arguments not to accept all of them.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Tim, want to come in?
Yes, I agree. I have no argument with this report. Wait for me, Chris. I'll come back on that. I'll come back on the second one in a minute.
Okay, let's
I have no argument.
positive.
I think your point actually is right in terms of reporting at the end of the year on what allowances people have accepted. Is that should include wholly owned company allowance, payments as well. And I'm actually not sure that it does at the moment. And if it doesn't, if it does, then it's not very clear that it does. Let's put it that way. And it might be that people who are getting them have all got a different SRA, and therefore they've only taken the one and it doesn't count. But we should just be clear on that reporting after the fact. Happy about making. It's very easy for us to clarify it forward, but we just need to remember to amend those annual reports to make sure that's clear. But otherwise, I'm content with this report, and thank you for your work on it.
Great. Are there thank you, Tim, any other comments, queries on this report? Otherwise, I think we've got, let's bag that positive comments then, Chris.
Yes.
Let's take a breath and move into the next report. So this one is just so you can keep up with the paperwork, members. It's dated May 2024, and the title page is the interim report of the Independent Remuneration Panel on changing to committee governance structure. So it's same format, Chris, if I could ask you just to take us into that with any sort of preamble, and then just to go through one by one the recommendations, and then we can give councillors opportunity to ask questions, query, etc. Is that all right?
Okay. I mean, obviously, we've called this an interim report because there is a high degree of uncertainty about what you'll actually end up with. And we don't want to tie you into a situation where you're going to have to publish something and then it's going to be totally different. So you can go ahead with the other report, it can be published, all the rest of it. There's no requirement to publish it. It's very much for you to consider. Now, if you end up with something that's pretty similar, you wouldn't need to come back to the panel to get a say-so to put it in place. If you end up wanting to do something very different, I think you'd have to reconvene the panel just to have a look at it. But my reckoning is if you're fairly similar to something like this, then all you really need is to reconvene the panel post-implementation for a review. So that's the sort of the legal bit, as it were. But we didn't want to tie your hands too much, basically, because things could change. Now, if we go to the summary of proposals, and we're calling them proposals, not recommendations, to make that clear that this is not going to be set in stone, as it were. Proposal 1, cabinet member SRAs be deleted from the scheme. Fairly obvious, fairly straightforward. You won't have cabinet members, so don't keep them in the scheme. Proposal 2, there'll be some controversy about this. We talked as a panel, we went back to this issue around how much the basic should increase by. And I reported back some of the comments from the Constitution Working Group. We particularly Councillor Prater's comment that it's easier to reduce than increase at a later date. But the reality is, as far as the scheme works, if you put it too high, it affects every other SRA because they're all calculated as percentages of the basic. And if you then try and reduce it, the protection arrangements kick in the scheme. So actually, you don't end up reducing it unless you abandon those protection arrangements. Now, our view is it's important to keep protection arrangements in the scheme because any scheme affecting people's remuneration should have some sort of protection in case of sudden changes, because people can't really work with something where one day they're getting one amount and next day they're getting a different amount. So we went through it and we looked at the figures and we still thought that 5% was about the right level. I mean, we were looking at the range 5 to 10%. But when we think about it, I know some of these numbers have changed. The proposed basic allowance on the figures when we were doing this would be 6,014. Now, if you bear in mind the voluntary discount, that is really 12,024. And then obviously we knock 50% off for the voluntary element. And if you calculate it on an hourly and weekly basis, then you're above the minimum wage. You're very slightly below the living wage, and you're above the average part-time wage in Folkestone and Hythe district area. And that's taking the ONS figures and the Kent Economic Data Survey. And we thought that was about the right positioning. You don't want to be, well, this is a view of the panel, obviously you may have a different view, but we thought you don't want to be really, really much higher than the average wage in the area we're representing for part-time work. It is above it, but it's not unreasonably so. We also thought in terms of Kent authorities and also authorities with a similar demographic and sort of the comparator group of authorities, which goes wider than Kent for Folkestone and Hythe, it puts you at the top level, in the top 3 basically, and that seemed reasonable. The main comparator we got is with Swale, who've got the committee system, and that's similar to them. They're very slightly higher, and so we thought, yeah, giving all those factors, given the difficulties of reducing at a later date, put it here, see how it works out. Now, that was our view. Obviously, you may come to a different view. Bear in mind, when we do our calculations, we work on the basis of an ordinary councillor doing a 20-hour week on the council. And that figure came from some time back. LGA used to do surveys on it. We interview councillors, talk to them about how much work they do. And you usually find it's between 15 and 20 hours, and we always took the 20-hour figure. And so that's how we also compare this with things like the National Living Wage and the Living Wage Foundation. One of the things we have noticed in this last round is there's possibly a downward pressure on those hours. And we haven't changed the figure from 20, but coming across in the interviews was people feeling on the basic councillor role, they're doing less hours. And we wondered, we don't know why that is. It might be because you have more modern ways of working with the use of Zoom and things like that. So if you're a rural member, for example, your travel time, your journey times are much less. If you can do Zoom meetings, don't have to come into council at all. So it could be things like that influencing it. But, the figures is probably dropped down to about 18 hours a week or something like that we should use. We made the decision not to make any changes. We'll stick with the 20 hours for calculations. But taking into those factors, that's why we ended up saying, okay, we're staying with 5%. But we did seriously consider what being said by the panel. I'll go on to the next one, proposal 3, and take questions at the end. Deputy leader, we said if you keep it, drop it down to 20 points, because it really does have very little role in the new thing. But we have said, look, you could look at combining it with one of the vice chair roles. And I know you were saying all vice chair should be 75 points. That would give you a 70-point vice chair role, which we thought would be reasonable if you put, if you took it as the vice chair of the resources committee is automatically deputy leader, put those 20 points into that role, and it gives you a higher paid vice chair. We've also said the leader of the council will be reduced slightly further than we're suggesting in the current scheme. And we've also looked at what was said by this Constitution Working Group about tying it in to the chair of the policy committee. We actually came to the conclusion, yeah, that's a very good idea. Because when you really go into it, as no doubt you have, the overlap's going to be, quite difficult to deal with between if you have a separate leader role. But we thought keep the separate leader scheme allowance in the scheme. So if you do make the leader automatically chair of the policy committee. They have a choice about which allowance they take. Yeah, don't just delete it. Keep it there, because you never know. You may end up in a situation where you get a leader who says, I don't want to be chaired by the policy committee or whatever. Or there may be some, or they may want a lower allowance, not to take the higher allowance, whatever. You give some flexibility. It might create some pressure on them, I don't know, but we thought keep it as a separate one in the scheme. But if you can, you work out the way, do link it with the chair of the policy to avoid that conflict that could arise between those two roles if they're not linked. Proposal 5 is the number of committee tiers, have 4 tiers. That gives you more flexibility. And we've given the list of which committees are doing what. One of the things we did look at was the regulatory committees and the planning and licensing. And we noted what was being said about the heavier workload of planning. But our feeling was there is also, although the licensing may have lower workload, there's quite a lot of responsibility. And you sort of take examples, if you license some, like you license a nightclub and then it burns down and everyone gets killed, it's quite a serious issue. And there are some serious things that come into licensing. A lot aren't, but there are some serious things. And we thought, well, the level of responsibility makes up for the fact they may not have quite the same workload. Again, you may have your own views on that. So we got the tiers we propose. Proposal 6 is just 100 basis points for chairing a tier 1 committee, but bear in mind the policy chair would be more if the person takes the leader SRA. Keeping the regulatory committees the same in proposal 7. Proposal 8 is for chairs of tier 3 committees, which is a new thing because we haven't tended to do that in the past. Tier 4 is ad hoc committees, and we're saying keep how we do at the moment. Yeah, nothing for those. And then the role of the chairs, and we're saying, okay, it should be 50 basis points for the vice chairs of the 2 big main committees. But if you combine them, one with the deputy leader role, it should be 70. And we looked at the communities and environment proposal, and we actually thought, yeah, if you make the vice chair the lead on one of those 2 things, then that could justify going to 70 points as well. So that gives you the option now. I know you were talking about 75 points, Councillor Pater, but it's that'll give you 70 points for those 2 deputy chairs. We looked a lot at the issue around what you call spokesperson roles, which there are some examples where councils have adopted spokespersons, and we really thought that was quite problematic. They can tend to multiply, but also when you're in a committee structure, you might have a political lead on a topic, but actually the spokesperson is the chair of the committee. And you know, you have to be very careful on spokesperson type roles in the committee structure, because actually you can't make policy on the hoof in a committee structure. You know, it's the committee making the decisions. Not an individual, and that's the difference with a cabinet thing. Proposal 11, vice chairs again, introducing payments for vice chairs, small amount, but you know, we feel it could be more responsibility. Proposal 12, on those vice chairs don't get paid. Proposal 13 is just to make sure you've got a limit on the number of committees in the constitution or whatever. And that's really about not creating too many committees. And I know that's not proposed at the moment, but sometimes when you've got a committee structure, you know, people hit a problem and then say, oh, let's have a new committee and let's pay a person to chair it, and so on, and it just multiplies. Okay, so that's a basic run through. And we've got some of the same figures from the other report in here, so you can actually have a look at it in panel formats. We have put that approximate costing on the saving that you get with this new thing, which is costed on the basis of every post in the 2 different structures being filled, which never happens in reality, but it just gives you some idea. So in reality, you do have a cheaper scheme. How that works out in practice and what the actual saving will be, depends. So you have got some flexibility to change from what we're saying and still stay within your budget limits. But what I've tried to explain is some of the reasoning behind where we're coming from, but recognizing that a lot of it is up in the air. I mean, what would be interesting to us is looking at how the workload of an ordinary backbench member changes with the new committee system. And that will be one of the biggest factors on assessing the basic allowance when we come to do the review. Yeah. That's a very quick run through of something that's quite complicated.
Right. Well, thank you, Chris, for taking us through it step by step, and again for all the effort that you've put in with the panel to get to this point. So, members, I guess it's now opportunity and over to you. So, Jenny, looks like you're first in.
Thank you. Yeah, although I think my husband's pressing me to move. Yes, I didn't think I'd be the first one. I thought Tim would be the first one. I have to say, I mean, I understand the reasoning for the basic allowance, and I don't disagree with that. However, you know, in terms of reducing allowances, I think that's, I mean, in the 29 years or 32 years now that I've been a district councillor, I don't think that's happened at all. And I perhaps would look at it another way, in that you might take some allowances out, for instance, some vice chairs maybe, or something like that, rather than, if you were thinking of reducing the basic allowance or other allowances. I don't know who you were talking to in terms of reduction in workload. As a rural councillor, with 7 or 8 parish councils, meetings on a monthly basis, plus all the emails, I can't see where workload is reducing, but maybe it's just me. And I'm still not. I suppose although the overall you show a reduction in cost, we do seem to have an awful lot of appointments, I suppose.
You have a lot of, sorry?
A lot of positions, should I say.
Yeah. Okay. I don't think it's excessive in the number of positions. We have introduced the vice chair for lower down the committees, which we haven't in the past, and that's a debatable one. You may not want to go with that because we haven't had it in the past, but there's just the feeling that, you know, there could be more importance placed on the committees in the different governance structures, and maybe these roles should be remunerated now, and that's why we put a small allowance in for those in tier 3. The workload thing, yes. We get a range of things when we talk to people, and we talk to people from different areas. With respect, Jenny, I don't think you're an ordinary councillor, an ordinary backbench councillor. And generally, we find it's in the 15 to 20 hours. In the past, it's been more at the 20 hours and some slightly above. What we've getting some comments coming in suggesting it's going down slightly, and that it wouldn't be surprising with the amount you're doing now, using technology, reducing travel time and all the rest of it. You'd expect something like that to happen. Unfortunately, we don't have available to us the national surveys anymore. For some reason, the LGA seems to have stopped doing those. And so we haven't got a good comparator there. But we've always taken, if you like, from the past, the higher end, assume everyone works really hard. Well, we recognise that not everybody does, and so that's why we've always worked on the 20 hours basis. It's just this time we were saying, is that still right? Should we be reducing it slightly? I don't want to do that. And you've always got to bear in mind with the basic allowance that we are applying a 50% voluntary discount. So we are saying, actually, you should get 12,000 a year for being a councillor, and you'll get 6,000. And then when you look at average wage in the district, you do have to think also of your local economics as well. So yeah, there's lots of factors in there. I can see where you're coming from, and I say we were looking 5 to 10%, somewhere in that sort of range. We've plumped for the bottom, which may be seen as a bit extreme, but I could just imagine if you did put it too high and want to reduce it, I don't think it would happen. You'd end up freezing things and letting inflation take its toll over time.
Which we've done.
You've got to think, you've got to think of the impact on the other SRAs as well.
I agree. Yes, I understand.
And what we're worried about there is you would start pushing up some of the higher ones too high. So therefore you probably want to reduce them slightly, and therefore you start squeezing differentials. And we spent a lot of time talking with people about the differentials. And most people thought the differentials between different levels were pretty much okay. There's a lot of factors. It's a judgment call though, Jenny, as you well know. At the end of the day,
I quite understand your recommendations. Yes. Just
Great. Thank you, Jenny. Are you happy then, Jenny? Is there anything else, or shall I move on to Connor? Happy for now, Jenny?
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you.
Okay, Connor, do you want to come in?
Thanks, Susan. A few points. Firstly, just what you said just before and just now again about the higher basic rate affecting obviously all the SRAs.
Yeah.
So I mean, where do we stand in your opinion? I guess as a council currently, where we agreed to a 5% increase in the basic, but a freeze on SRAs. And I mean, if you look in our current sort of table, although it still says 200 points for a cabinet member, it's not actually twice what the basic allowance is because we froze that. So, the cabinet member allowance is static on about 11,500 something, but the basic allowance is now 6,014. So, I'd be interested to see what leeway do we have moving forward to continue that sort of practice should we deem it necessary moving forward.
Yeah, I suppose this is where the practice deviates from the theory, isn't it? Because what you start to do is squeeze the differentials. If you do that too long, now, there's been
we knew it would change in a year, which is why we sort of it was a bit easier to make the decision, I guess.
Yes, if you're looking to change it, it's easier to make those decisions because it's not long term. I mean, longer term, what you're going to do if you carry on like that is you will squeeze those differentials, and I think that starts to become unfair because there is a significant extra amount of work compared with the basic councillor and a cabinet member. I mean, it's always the argument around when you bottom load pay awards, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, what happens? You bottom load pay awards about 3 or 4 years, and then suddenly you've got no people wanting to do the senior roles or whatever, and suddenly you have a big increase on the senior roles, and then that gives you more of a problem. I think, so one has to be careful with that. Okay, you've done that with the current scheme. I mean, this would be talking about increases on top of what you're talking about, because you've already implemented the 5%, so you'd be implementing 5% on top of that, so these figures go up again. Because this is a new scheme, I think your differentials are about right. So if you do change into the new scheme, then you've solved the problem.
Yeah.
I think if you don't change the new scheme, then about 2 or 3 years down the line, you're going to have a problem with those differentials. But let's assume you're changing.
Well, I would imagine be ashamed to do all this work and not at least change some things.
Yes, precisely.
I mean, I'll come back to, something else, I brought up when we, way back when we had our sort of interviews and chats, so you still got, like audit and governance, but also now the new subcommittees in as tier 2 committees. And obviously, my thinking is, is that those subcommittees would probably only meet quarterly. So, I mean, again, that's quite in my opinion, quite a high remuneration for a committee chair that only would chair probably at best 4 meetings a year. So, I'm still wrangling with that one.
Yeah, and I think this is about some of those you may find when you come back and look at it post-implementation. They haven't met as often as might have been thought or whatever, or they're set too high, and then you get the slight problem with them. But in practice, some of those subcommittees may well be chaired by people who've got SRAs and other respects, so it may not be an issue. I think this is why it's an interim book. There's a large area of uncertainty about how some of these things, for instance, some of the committees of the tier one, subcommittees of the tier one committees are very responsible areas, but they may not meet very often. They may meet twice a year.
Yeah.
But in that case, you probably have a person who's vice chair or chair of a tier one committee chairing those as well. So there is a question about how you play it. As it were. I've just got to plug in.
And then just finally, I mean, if we're sort of trying to make a choice between Appendix 1 and Appendix 2, then I think Appendix 2, the way it reads, just makes a bit more sense. It's a bit clearer.
Yeah, I hope because you only had a summary of recommendations last time. Sorry, just excuse me. I'm just trying to plug in the battery. I have to change position. There we go. Sorry, change position. I didn't know whether the battery would last the full meeting. I should have realised it. They never do. Okay. Sorry, if you can repeat that last bit. Sorry, is this clearer to you now? Is it where we're coming from on the reasoning?
Yeah, I just in terms of the two appendices, how it's sort of worded and how it lays out, I much prefer the look of Appendix 2. So
yeah.
Okay, great.
Yes, Appendix 2. Yes, it just shows you, a clear picture. I do think it is important. One of the messages in this, and it's something we hadn't considered until I met with you, and then I fed it back, is this link between the leader and the chair of the policy and resources. If you don't do that, I think you're going to get all sorts of problems, really. It'll be a very unmanageable political situation, I think is the phrase.
My reflections as well. However,
Yes.
it is for members to decide. Connor, have you gone through your queries?
yeah, no, that's me.
Right, and Tim now is putting his hand up. I was just going to say, and Tim, over to you.
I wasn't letting you off that easy. Speaking on behalf of the Union of Deputy Leaders and former Deputy Leaders of the Council, I would still make the representation that 350 points for leader and being 5 times the remuneration for deputy leader is an interesting balance, but I do understand, and I'm sure that other members of the Union of Deputy Leaders understand that their leaders do work very hard, and I'll suck it up and wish my successor all the best, and I hope they enjoy it very much. The one issue where I think that the balance does feel a bit odd, on the other hand, in terms of the remuneration, is the leader of the opposition one, ironically. Is that the leader of the opposition SRA is now the same as the chair of the council, is the same as the leader of both the tier 1 and tier 2 committees, and is second only to the leader of the council. I actually think that's quite high in terms of where that then sits in the balance of remuneration across the council, because that leader is only going to sit, maybe a lead spokesman, maybe somebody who don't lead, but they'll only be on one committee. Almost.
Yeah.
They're not going to be on both. They'll be out full council, but then we'll have a more limited role because there'll be the amount delegated as well. I just think that you're putting it into a scale which equates against cabinet posts at the moment, and then reducing those, then we reduce those cabinet posts absolutely rightly, but you're not actually impacting the scale of the of that post, and I think that's going to feels financially misbalanced.
I think you're absolutely right on that. My fault entirely. We just looked at this thing originally and said, okay, it doesn't change this role, and so we didn't look at it anymore. And you've raised it now, and I'm just thinking through, and you're absolutely right. I think that is something you'd have to change. Yeah. Don't disagree.
Is,
at all.
is that something that we have to change, or is that something you want to have a
I-
judgely huddle on and come back with a final?
We can do something without having to meet and send you back something. We'll have a look at that. You're dead right, because we just said, oh, it doesn't change the leader of opposition, so we'll leave that to one side, and we didn't focus on that. And that's an oversight on my part.
Can you, Chris, on that, so could you just date that one, just a version control June 24, so that we
Right.
can, I can just make sure which one I'm looking at and make sure the right one's appended to whatever report in June.
Yeah. Okay, what I'll do, Judith, are you there, Judith?
I am here, yeah.
Yeah. What I think we can do is we'll just do a little bit of work of it, send it around everybody by email, and if everyone's happy, then we'll just make that amendment and send it in, yeah?
Yeah,
Do you think-
it sounded perfectly reasonable to me, yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, we did leave that one to one side because it was one of the ones not technically not affected, but you're quite right. When you put it into the scheme of things, it looks out of kilter, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay, so I'll have a look at it. Yeah, thank you for that, Tim. So I do apologise for that oversight on our part, but I knew you'd pick out any oversights.
Always rely on Tim for the detail. Right,
Yeah.
Tim, was there anything else on your list, or?
No, broadly apart from that, again, a very helpful piece of work. As Connor and I can always quibble with a bit of detail here and there. On the other hand, I agree with him. I think that the Appendix 2 sheet is the clearer of the two presentations of that. And yeah, we will, I'm sure, a year into it, have a stare at some of the details and the numbers and consider that. But I think it's a perfectly good basis to go from. It gives us a shape that allows members to understand where we're going. So we'll see. I'm happy to take it on that basis with whatever judgely tweaks you come up with to deal with my point.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, lovely. Are there any other comments from any other members on this second report? No, Paul, I can see you shaking your head. No, okay. Right, Chris, Judith, is there anything else you want to add in? Jim, no? Anything else you want to add in as just wrapping up, Chris, other than for me to thank you all for the work you've done?
No, I just think if Judith's got anything to add.
No, I'm fine, thank you. Yeah, I think everything's been covered.
I say we'll get that done pretty quickly into you, and as I say, we'll label it June 24 for version control. And I do apologise for that oversight.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Chris, and good luck with them. No doubt we will keep in touch with you.
Yes, indeed. I should delay my resignation letter until after we've done that bit.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Judy, and particularly thank you, Chris, for your many years of service on the IRB. It is much appreciated.
Okay, thank you. I've got to leave this meeting
Feel free to leave us, and because we'll go on to the
I'm just going to find the leave button. I found it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you. Okay, right, members, we now move on to item 5, which is a review of outside bodies. And so Michelle joins us today. We've got an update from Michelle. You got a couple of slides, I think, that were in the pack. Michelle, do you want to take us into that?
Yeah, thanks, Susan. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to try and attempt to share my screen with you. Let's have a look if this works. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Is that okay? Excellent. So I'll take you through it quite quickly and leave some time for some questions at the end. So as you know, we're doing a review of the outside bodies. These slides aren't moving at the moment. Oh, there you go. We have 30 outside bodies, and we're reviewing them, looking at how they fit in under the new committee system, and also with the potential aim of rationalising them if that is one of the outcomes, and also looking at how they fit in and support the delivery of the corporate plan. We're looking at how the information is passed between the members that sit on the outside bodies and the rest of the council, and making sure that feedback is given at regular intervals, and also that there's a record management system in place, so that it's easy for people to pick this up and have a look and identify who's on the outside bodies, what they do, and how they link back into the council. So with regards to the process of the review, we're currently at stage 1, which is the analysis stage, and we're looking to group into the following themes: regional, strategic, statutory, community citizenship, and operational. as listed there in the research, we're looking at a number of elements with the outside bodies. This stage where we're currently at, and I'm working on this with Gemma and Amandeep, is probably the stage that's taking a little bit more of the time. So for each body, for some of them, there's very easy to access information. It's on websites. I can speak to the member who's appointed and get that information. The time that's taking is where the information isn't so readily available. And so we're having to contact the groups, we're contacting the members, and it's just chasing that information. Everyone's busy and pulling that back into a report for you. In some instances, the Dungeness Site Stakeholder Group, the East Kent Spatial Development Company, just giving you some examples, and the Bloyne and Shepway Cooperation Committee that I had an email exchange with Tim about yesterday. Thank you. That information is easy to find and easy to complete. For others, such as Age UK, which sounds strange because it's such a well-known group, the actual information on what the outside body is in terms of the member appointment and how that is working and operating, the Nuclear Legacy Advisory Forum, the Kent Coast Volunteering, for those, that information is just, I'm sure it's there, it's just a little bit harder, and we're having to dig a little bit deeper to find that. And then it's making sense of that. So in one case, we have an appointed member who's never been contacted or attended any meetings of that outside body. So it's kind of looking at how that works, whether that's still a role that's required or not. And in other instances, if it's a Kent-wide group, the member may be appointed from different councils, and our council may not be one of those for that term. So it's how we capture that information and feed that back in to make sure that the outside body is getting the best value out of the member appointment, and the council is getting the best value out of the being a member of that outside body. So then the next stage after that analysis is to present back to yourselves. So you can have a look at all the information we've collated so that you have enough information to start looking at some decision making, which will then feed into the constitution as that's being drafted. So we'll be looking at whether you want to rationalise them, how they link into the new committee system, the process of appointing and the process of feedback, and also this management system so that that information is captured and is easy to update going forward. So that's, because I'm conscious of time, that's a really quick run through, so I'm happy to take any questions. I'm going to stop sharing so that I can actually see you, but if you need me to go back into the presentation, just let me know.
Great, thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you for taking us through that and being mindful of time. So members, clearly that is really a lot about the process and the current work in hand, as opposed to any emerging findings. I think probably we'll have more substance for you at the next meeting of this
Absolutely.
group. And I know we'll be looking to get that in the diary, Jake, Alex, as we come to conclude the meeting. But are there any sort of interim questions at this stage for Michelle? Tim?
Just very briefly on that, I fully agree, except the piece of work which is being done there. Is there a consideration being given to those which make the cut and remain appointments at that stage, whether the appointment for all of them is going to remain being made by full council, or whether we separate we could differentiate between some are appointed by full council and some are appointed by the key committees, or the committees to which that they seem to apply most. Then there might be a logic in delegating the appointment to specific bodies, to specific committees, and it might be worth just considering that as part of the piece of work you're doing there as well. That was it.
Yeah, I'm very happy to do so. I think that was our intention, that as a result of the analysis, it would lend us to either say these are council appointments made here, or these are the ones that are made by these committees, and actually these are, really in the streamlining of it all, those that are a different order altogether. So we can absolutely factor that in, Tim, as we come back, Michelle, can't we?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Our thought processes and recommendations for you.
Yeah.
Paul, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Yeah, it's a good piece of housekeeping, really, isn't it? Something which is probably long overdue. And I know it isn't just at district level. We're seeing exactly this kind of thing where, you end up with legacy groups that, haven't met in donkey's years. So I think it's a great piece of work to be done. So, and again, I think for me, and just in terms of my own role on New Leaf, for it to define the reporting mechanism back into the council is absolutely critical. So for me, I think if that's the other key piece that comes out of this, I think that will help us as members, making sure that we're adding the value that we think we're adding when we're part of these bodies. So that's a great piece of work. Thank you.
Yeah, really, really important, isn't it? That feedback loop and communication, Paul, in terms of them making sure that all the members are briefed and alive to that. So yeah, thank you for that. Any other comments from members? If not, thank you, Michelle, for taking us through that. Good luck with the rest of the work.
Thank you.
We need to make sure we've got enough time on the next agenda to have perhaps some emerging findings. And I think it'd be useful just to keep going, even if we haven't got to the point of concluding the work. We need to just present where we're at. So members are absolutely. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
If everyone's all right, we will then move on to item 6. Now, with my apologies, because I actually missed the meeting on the 23rd of May for reasons you'll be alive to, but we do have David with us. So on the agenda, there are various matters, David, that have been listed. Well, there's sort of 3 main bullet points. Do you want to take us through those? Because the item is really to consider the matters below. So if I can ask you to sort of lead us through that, and then we can
of course,
for discussion more broadly. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. Hello, everybody. So there's those 3 main matters to look at. So the first one, those who were at the briefing will recall, it was suggested that perhaps it might be appropriate to have a vice chair of the Planning and Licensing Committee, and of course we've got the Licensing Act Committee as well, which is a separate one, but we all understand it's going to be the same members anyway, but there has to be that separation, which we've discussed before, so I won't go over that again. So the rationale that was put forward in support of having a vice chair was mainly in the context of the planning element of it. So it was, I think, the current chair of planning who made the suggestion, saying that it was really important to have someone who, rather than having a situation whereby if the chair was unable to attend, the meeting would then have to appoint a chair for that meeting. Rather than that being the case, it would instead reflect what is presently in place, which is there's a fixed vice chair, and they will attend sort of committee meetings with officers, etc., so that they can get that further information and knowledge around the applications that are being considered. So it's basically what your views on that, and do you think that's a sensible thing to do, or throwing it open to everybody to discuss, really.
Okay, let's take it one by one then. Comments, support, disagreements? Jim, do you want to come in? You've come off mute.
Well, thanks very much, Susan. I think, what I'm primarily concerned about is that the written questions that were submitted with regard to the last meeting. I know there was some, I forget which question it was, but there was something about this in the questions, and I'm just keen that they get swept up, because that's the feedback that I've had from people who attended the briefing. So I'm just keen that we get this kind of nailed, as it were. It seems to me that we're kind of prolonging the agony here. So I just really want to get this sort of, done and dusted and wrapped up.
Okay, so that was a broader point, Jim, about any questions that have been submitted either before or now. We need to conclude and get some responses back to members. Is that that's what I've understood? Okay, yeah. So Jake, sorry, I know Gemma and Amandeep are both on annual leave now, but we just need to do a review of any of the correspondence we've had from members in preparation for that meeting, any questions we've had, and also, David, the ongoing list, the Q&A. we need to really just make sure we've bottomed all up, because there are some in there, certainly I recall from last time, where we hadn't concluded them. And I think that's what you're asking for, Jim, is we need to draw a line and conclude these things now. Okay. And I'm just wondering whether that is another issue that we could bring back to the next meeting, if members would find that helpful. Maybe that's the way, Jim, of us trying to draw a line under the outstanding loose ends.
All I'm concerned about, I'm very confident in the process, but in fact, these are questions that were submitted before the last briefing. So now we're talking about the briefing that's just gone, and we're missing what's left there. So now we're kind of stacking up a pipeline of unanswered questions, and I'm reluctant to kind of, or I feel unable to really do a lot now until we get our kind of house in order with regard to the baggage that we're dragging forward. So I'm just really keen to get, and they're relatively simple. Well, I don't know. What do I know? But I would guess that they will be they just need to be addressed.
Okay, and we will take that as an action. Yeah. Okay, then Tim, do you want to come in? I mean, we were asking just a question about your comments on the Vice Chair regulatory committees. I just don't want to lose that. If there are specific views.
That was the specific point that I was coming in on. As I understood it, there was never a question that there wouldn't be a vice chair of that committee. There will be a vice chair of that committee. And that was actually the answer to the question that was raised, is that there's been a misunderstanding on that. The fact that they're not listed in 3.1 on there is not that they're not going to, a vice chair is not going to exist. It's just that they will not have an additional named role. They don't have a specific lead responsibility apart from being the vice chair of that committee. And what people have looked at is that list and gone, well, there is no vice chair of planning on that role, therefore there is no vice chair of planning. And they have misunderstood that there is a vice chair of planning. It's just that their only responsibility is to chair planning when the chair of planning is not there, and to be the vice to the chair. And that's what I found difficult, was that wasn't just explained either in writing in answer to that question very clearly, or dealt with at the meeting very clearly, which was that you misunderstood that there will be a vice chair. We're not suggesting removing it. It's never been suggested removing it. It's never been discussed removing it. It's just that they don't have a lead responsibility. They don't have a named responsibility for anything else. And I just think we could have been cuter on just being clear on that, and would have resolved that question much earlier. And that list under 3.1 does not suggest that there will not be one.
I must admit, that was my understanding, Tim, as well, that we would, exactly as you put it. So maybe we can, unless you've got a different view, David, I think that's how we address the issue and clarify for members that, the vice chair is there to support the chair in the administration of the meetings. As Councillor Prater has said, it just doesn't have an additional lead responsibility or a functional role beyond, as you say, that committee and support to the chair if they cannot act. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. It's just, I'm sorry if you can hear phones ringing.
Paul, did you want to come in, Paul?
Yeah, if I may, just supporting Tim's point. But I think the other thing that David mentioned was something that Jackie raised specifically about planning, which and does it apply to everywhere else? And that is the inclusion of the vice chair in the pre-meetings and formal briefings with officers, and whether that is the expectation that we set for the tier 1 and tier 2 committees that we operate. Is that where we want to be? Because I don't think that's the expectation or the practice at this moment in time.
David?
Well, yes, I think it would be the expectation that vice chairs of the tier 1 committees would be very much involved. It's not. It's a different role. It's I suppose it's focusing on them being a lead member for a topic, rather than it being, oh, you're a vice chair and that means that you step in when the chair can't act. So there is an expectation, I would say, that they are involved in those pre-meets and are able to feed into, well, the arrangements that are made and the decisions that are made outside of the meetings by officers, etc. So and to be part of that link. So I think it's important, yeah, that they are involved in that respect. So there would be an expectation that they attend at these informal meetings with officers and planning meetings, etc. When I say planning, I don't mean necessarily, the regulatory planning, but planning of the business of the committee to which they are appointed.
Okay, any other questions on that or comments on that first bullet point? If not, I'm sort of hearing that everyone agrees that they should be there. I mean, we appoint them as normal at the AGM. It seems appropriate to do so as normal and just as is, really. Okay, the next, if we haven't got any dissenting voices from that, the next bullet point was to consider the matter below, David, which was around the chair of strategy and resources. And so for the working group to consider if they wish the new constitution to state that the leader must chair SNR and the deputy leader must be vice chair. Are there other views on that?
I'll lead. Yes, I think that's a good idea. I think it gives a clear, if the leader of the council is not also taking a lead on the strategy of the council, what are they doing? So yes, it absolutely reasonably sits in the right place. The same applies in terms of deputy leader. Council finances are not going to become are not going to drop down the priority order of the things which councils are doing over the course of the next few years, unless Keir Starmer surprises me on a very high level. So it's going to it's going to remain a key point of focus, and I think that it also allows us to tie those questions about SRAs together a lot more neatly. Sit there. So yes, I would suggest that that is the way that we do it, and that but by electing the chair and the deputy chair of strategy and resources, you are actually, and we should say so, we are actually electing the leader and the deputy leader of the council as well.
Thank you, Tim. Connor, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, cheers. Mostly agree. I think the leader should definitely be the chair of finance and strategy. I think there could be a bit more flexibility though for the deputy leader. I wouldn't like to see a situation where you might have a deputy leader whose skills would be better suited as chair of the community and environment committee, for example. So I think I'd be hesitant to lock them into that single position when they could be better served elsewhere. The leader, no question, definitely, but I think there should be allowed a little bit of flexibility. I think that the deputy leader should definitely be a chair or vice chair of one of those one of the two tier 1 committees, but I think they should be allowed a little bit of flexibility there.
Any other views from members? Got a slight difference of opinion on that one. Jim, Paul?
Sorry, Susan. Yeah, I was trying to find put my thumb up, my hand up button. Yeah, I would tend to agree with Connor on this. I think while we may procedurally do as Tim suggests, I think that it would be unwise to lock ourselves in because, as Connor so rightly says, the skill sets change, and we would unnecessarily tie ourselves to something that may not be appropriate in the future. So I would tend to go for the flexibility option that's suggested by Connor.
But still with the tier 1 committee as Connor's recommended, yeah.
Yes, absolutely, but just not to lock ourselves into a specific wording.
Okay, all right, thank you, Jim. And Paul, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I support Jim and Connor in this. Absolutely to lock the chair in of the strategy and resources as the leader, but give that flexibility, because again, one of the things that I've sort of been wondering is where does the chair and vice chair of Communities Environment Committee come from? Where are they likely to position? I'm just trying to think who's there currently and where would they sit, and who would fill that role. But it just begs the question then that when we do roll this out, and when we have well, if we do have a change of people in particular positions when this is rolled out, we have to do it in a particular order, then, don't we, to make sure that we do that match up of the people with the right skills in the right position. Then that's also it's just a bit of a logistics thing at some time in the future. But yeah, I agree with Jim and Connor. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go down on my ship. How I know when I'm going to lose something. Just to say those procedurally, that's going to make for a fairly interesting vote, because you would be electing very clearly the chairs and the vice chairs of the committee. You wouldn't be electing the leader of the council, because that is the leader of the council is the chair of the strategy committee, but you are then going to have a separate vote for the deputy leader, who will be one of the position holders of the two of either the chair or the two deputy chairs of the two strategic committees. And that we would need to include in the thought of whether that you're then going to add the 20 SRA basis points on top of that role for that one position. So effectively, you're going to end up with a separate vote at some stage during the AGM on who is the deputy leader of the council, when you won't have a separate vote on who's the leader. Just saying.
Yeah, but so long as we can keep us on the straight and narrow, and if we find it doesn't we
can build the process to do it. We just need to know, have in our mind that process is going to look it's going to look a bit odd, but it will work. And I don't disagree with the outcome, not least the fact that the deputy leader's role is apparently very minor. And he said, still smarting from that.
All right, so I think well, I'm getting to a place where you're all in agreement. Shame we haven't got Jenny here, but I think for the purpose of minuting that, David, I'll come back to you. Are you going to advise us there's any big legal problem with what you've heard?
No, I don't think there is. I mean, I would agree. I often, fixing things in constitutions in a certain way can be problematic. So flexibility, I think, is appropriate here. I mean, it is pretty much standard in committee systems that the leader will be the chair of, the resources, policy resources, strategy resources, whatever it's called. But the main committee will be chaired by the leader. I have seen it where it wasn't. But that was because the leader decided that they would step down. There was some arguments going on. But they didn't step down from the role of leader. It was simply, I'm stepping down from the role of the chair of that committee. So, there are sort of potential, issues that could arise by fixing it. But I think that they'd be very unusual and rare. But so, yeah, I think definitely the flexibility with the vice chair. Yes, and probably no. I mean, in fixing the leader as the chair, it makes sense. But there might be some issues that arise down the line where, as I say, I've seen it in another council where the leader said, "Right, I'm no longer chairing this," and someone else had to be elected or appointed. Whereas if you've got that something in the constitution that says no, the chair has to be the leader, I suppose that then stops the leader from stepping down, unless they resign as leader as well, because then that would automatically remove them. So yeah, I can see the logic in it, but from a legal perspective, it should be fine. Yeah,
and I just think operationally for me as well, I can see that there's a good fit in terms of that leader and that chair of the strategy and resources, just because of the nature of the conversations and the significance of some of the work that the leader will continue to do. Okay, well, if we're in agreement on that, the last bullet point we have got on the agenda, and just conscious of time, however, it's important, is the role of the leader and chairs. And there were a couple of role descriptions that were provided to members prior to the meeting. So they were circulated, with apologies, quite late. I think it was yesterday. Are there, I don't know whether members have had an opportunity to look at those. If there are any immediate comments, we can take them now. If you would rather, we can look at them again next time to give you longer to have a look at them. They are quite straightforward. From my perspective, there's nothing in there that I think is a horror or anything that you'd be unexpected. But any views?
Oh, sorry, Susan, if I can just, I can't find my button on my phone. Yeah, I was going to say exactly what you said. They seems to me to be very straightforward. There isn't anything in there that is unusual. It's, as Tim said earlier, it's all about strategic direction. It's about what do you call it, Susan? Upward connecting, but also liaising down through the organisation. There's really three key points that that come through in all of those bullet points. One is strategy, two is upward engagement, and three is managing the organisation. And there isn't really anything else that a leader does. So, apart from tell the jokes.
All right, Paul. Thank you, Tim. Paul, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks. Again, I think in 3.2, where we say the roles have the following general responsibilities, we're saying this is what they can do. And again, I think it just gives the flexibility for the individual committees to decide how they're going to function with the chair and vice chair roles. So I think it gives us a framework without being too restrictive. That's my view of the world. So thank you for that. I agree with it. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you, Paul. Any other comments, Tim?
Yeah, just to briefly re-rehearse the point around the chart in 3.1 is that we've named that those specific chair and vice chair positions will have those specific named areas of responsibility in terms of presentation, but that is not to denying the existence of other named vice chairs or chairs, etc. I apologise, my colleague just exploded. So yeah, that's all fine as far as I'm concerned. I think they were broadly non-scary job descriptions, so happy to accept.
You're on mute, Susan.
Sorry, I didn't want you to hear me blow my nose. Right. Okay. Righty-ho. So if there aren't any other comments on those, I think that brings us to the end of the agenda. I would just want to just do a quick once round to say, are there any other issues that you would like to raise? Well, we've got David with us. So Tim, it looks like you want to come in.
Yeah, just in terms of timing, David, I know that we're looking at a constitution towards the back end of July, or first draft of Cites Constitution. I'm also clear that that's 6 weeks ago at how's your typing speed, and are we going to be able to see that for then, please?
I can type very quickly, Tim, actually. But,
so can I, but the words don't necessarily make as much sense in that order.
No, of course. Yeah, I'm about to start proper. I've got some sketch things out and documents in place. But I spoke with Amandeep a couple of days ago, in fact. So it was just to say I don't know if any of you are aware of a lady called Kirsty Cole. Perhaps not. She was a big, or still is, a big name in lawyers in local government, which is, as it sounds, it's a body representing lawyers in local government. It's very well known in the sector by lawyers. But her former roles, she was a monitoring officer and legal director, and then following on from that, a chief executive at an authority in the Midlands area, and she's still very active. She's since retired. She's still very active. So she does a lot of work with Association of Democratic Services Officers, with SIPFA, with Solace, etc., etc. So I thought, well, it'd be nice actually if we can have her as part of my team, because she's doing all of this consultancy work. So we've actually taken her on board as a consultant, and she's done quite a number of, well, she routinely does reviews and redrafts of constitutions. She's got a number of recent experiences doing the committee system type. So what I'm going to do is make use of her as well as myself. So be two pairs of hands getting it towards where we need to be. She actually started this week but he's unfortunately for her having to go through all the induction training, etc. So as of next week, I should have her available to help me push this forward.
So we're
Hopefully
taking
that's
that,
good
David,
news.
as confidence that you will hit the timeline. I just got the timeline up from the last time we met, which was saying about draft constitution, July/August. And our next meeting of this working group, which isn't in the diary as I understand it, but is also in that July/August type period. And then we also mentioned that we would have another member briefing in August. So we will need to look at some dates. If I can ask colleagues and committee services, Jake, Alex, if you can help us get that in a place that members can attend, so we've got good attendance for that. So
yeah, sure.
Okay, we have lost Connor and Jim and Jenny, but I think we are coming towards the end of it. Unless Tim, Paul, there's anything else that you want to flag for now? No, are we good?
Yeah, I might win a vote now.
Yeah.
Or at least take it to an arm wrestle. However, no, that's all good. Thank you for that.
All right, and Paul, I can see you nodding, so I think you're okay as well.
Yeah, fine, thank you, Susan.
Okay,
Yeah.
lovely. All right, well, look, my thanks to those of you. It's been a full meeting, as Connor said in the chat. It looks as though we've covered a lot of ground today, so my thanks to everyone involved, and I will see you in the next day or two, no doubt. Okay.
Sure you